a quick start with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll turn it over to the program. So while most of us are living, or maybe not even most of us, many of us right now on this call, on this Zoom, are living in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York area. We as Platt House and Advisory Council want to begin with a voicing of gratitude to the past and present generations of Indigenous people for the opportunity to live our lives on this space. Although we are gathering on the internet, many of us are living and learning in Lenapehoking. We currently call this space Philadelphia, but this land was stolen from the Lenni Lenape tribe and the original stewards of this land. Land acknowledgements are an important way to amplify conversations about the past and ongoing injustices against Indigenous peoples and the conversations about their rightful future in these spaces. We at Platt House like to start off every program with a land acknowledgement to remind people of these facts, and wherever you are on this continent or other colonized lands, we encourage you to research and pay attention to whose homeland you're sitting on. If you don't know the name or the story of the people whose land you occupy, you can find that information and many other great resources at native-land.ca, and Megan is always quick to put that in the chat, and it is a very interesting website. I highly recommend it. So thank you for allowing us to do that. This program is an initiative of the Platt House Alumni Advisory Council. So Platt House, me and my staff are going to take a back seat, and we are going to turn it over to one of the members, a couple of the members, but Gilberto Vega is going to start with kicking off this program. So we're going to turn it over.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gilberto Vega. I graduated from Penn in 2014. While I was at Penn, I was involved in the Penn Glee Club, Penn Sirens, 4A, a couple years in the Penn Band, and a bunch of other things. And so in recent years, I still really am actively involved in Platt life. So I helped the Penn Glee Club recently with their initiative for a gender inclusive choir, the IGIC, about becoming an all-gender choir. I also served on Platt House's advisory council along with some of the other folks on this call this evening. And then I also directed Penn Singer's production of The Magic Flute this past semester that was created as an entirely virtual opera. And so through the advisory council, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that wanted to help alumni understand why student groups are making so many of these changes in their membership, in their content, in their organizational structure, and so on, and offer ways so that we as alumni can stay engaged and really have a feel for the pulse on campus right now. So we're so happy to see you all here tonight, and we thank you for joining us. Please know that near the end of the program, we'll be having a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat at any time, or you can raise your hand when the panel is ready to start taking questions. And now I'm going to pass it over to Arnab.
Great, thanks, Gil. Good evening, everyone. My name is Arnab Mishra. I'm a class of '96 alumnus from Penn, and like Gil, I am also a member of the Platt House Advisory Council. I'm also a co-chair of the membership committee for the James Brister Society, which focuses on diversity and inclusion topics at the university. Wanted to echo Gil in thanking you all for being here this evening, and also wanted to thank our distinguished panel of students, faculty, and staff who are participating in this evening's discussions. We are honored this evening to have this panel moderated by Dr. Mamta Accapadi, who joined Penn in August as the Vice Provost for University Life. Dr. Accapadi is an experienced student affairs professional. She has been recognized for her sustained focus on leadership pipeline development and mentorship opportunities for historically underrepresented communities. She is also a fierce advocate for first-generation students, low-income students, and children of immigrants, which reflects her own background as a child of immigrants who went on to earn her bachelor's degree, master's degree, and PhD, all from the University of Texas at Austin. Mamta, on behalf of Platt House and our audience this evening, thank you for your time, and I want to turn this program over to you.
Oh, goody. Thank you so much, Arnab. I really appreciate your kindness, and it's such a gift to be here. Gilberto, listening to you, Arnab, just already has inspired me. You forgot one really important detail, which is this was my way of infusing myself into the artist community here at Penn. So, my college experience was deeply informed by my own involvement in cultural performance and art and reviving one of the oldest performance-based talent show tributes at the University of Texas. So there's a lot of the performing arts that has been just a transformative part of my own experience as a student. But we're not here to talk about me or with me. I would love to now take a moment to introduce the real gifts of our conversation today, which are our panelists. And so if y'all will join me in welcoming our following colleagues. So let me start with Dr. Herman Beavers. Dr. Beavers is the Julie Beren Platt and Marc E. Platt President's Distinguished Professor of English and Africana Studies. In addition to teaching in both departments, Dr. Beavers is an accomplished author, poet, and editor. In the past, he has also been an advisor to the African American Arts Alliance. Welcome, Dr. Beavers. I'd like to also introduce Daina Troy. Daina Troy worked in the entertainment industry prior to becoming the Associate Director of MAKUU, the Black Cultural Center on campus, where she advises student leaders and manages all of the communications. She's also a very active alumna in the James Brister Society and Black Alumni Society. As a student at Penn, she was president of the African American Arts Alliance. Welcome, Daina. I'd like to introduce Louis Lin. Louis Lin is a Master Public Health student at the Perelman School of Medicine. He graduated from the College of Arts and Sciences in 2020, where he studied political science and health and societies. Throughout his time at Penn, Louis has been deeply involved in the arts. He served as the chair of the Theater Arts Council on PAC Exec during his senior year and has served on the board for Front Row Theater Company. Louis devoted his time at Penn to work on equity and inclusion issues in and out of the arts, specifically with FIGLY and Asian American students. Louis currently also works full-time at Philadelphia Legal Assistance as project coordinator for the city's eviction diversion program. Welcome, Louis. I'd like to introduce Jake Milner. Jake is a senior from Chicago, graduating with concentrations in finance and accounting in the Wharton School. He is a member of the Penn Glee Club, Keynotes a cappella, and the Penn Pipers, and he has volunteered for 4 years with Penn's Music and Social Change program. He currently serves as president of the Glee Club and has previously served as business manager and operations manager. This year, as president, Jake led the club's initiative for a gender-inclusive choir, which resulted in a historic merger with the Penn Sirens and the opening of the Glee Club's singers section to singers of all genders. Welcome, Jake. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Laila Norford. Laila is a sophomore from Wayne, Pennsylvania, studying bioengineering. She plays the clarinet in the Penn Band, for which she currently serves as secretary and formerly served as recruitment and retention chair. In her leadership positions, Laila has helped the band successfully pivot to virtual recruiting and this semester adapt back to in-person rehearsal opportunities. She has worked with her fellow board members to establish the band's first diversity, equity, and inclusion chair and committee with the goal of helping the band reflect and celebrate the diversity of the student body at Penn, ensuring all members feel welcome in the organization. And we would also like to take this moment to thank Nicole Malloy from the Office of Social Equity and Community for helping us plan and shape and curate this event. So thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you for the entire team. Thank you all for being here. So with that, why don't we move into the conversation? So I'm going to first, if it's okay with this group, I want to first reflect on our students. So this question is directed to our students, and then we'll have a bit of reflection, and then we'll go into some more questions. So from the students, I would love to hear what prompted you to decide to be part of student performing arts at Penn, so to join the performing arts community at Penn, and what notable changes have you seen during your tenure or since you've joined?
I can go first. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So as Mamta has talked about, have been a part of Front Row Theater Company for all of my time and then involved in all the various tacky groups and performing arts. But I actually did not think I was going to do theater. I grew up dancing, then did theater in high school, and then said, that is taking up too much of my time. I need to study. I need to do classes and academics. And I did one show with Quadremics my freshman fall, and then decided that I could not leave the performing arts in high school, and it had to stay with me. And it just stuck with me. And because of my interest in advocacy work and policy, I decided that where I fit best and where I wanted to grow and put on art was in this form of socially relevant theater through Front Row Theater Company, which some of our students here today are a part of as well. And I think just going off of that point, something that has changed and has grown is this idea of what does socially relevant mean? I know Eduardo, who is an alum and is in the audience now, is also on board with me when we went through this change of defining what does socially relevant mean. We went through a period where we did 4 shows a year, and very loosely said 2 of our shows are funded by the Student Activities Council. Those are the only shows that need to be socially relevant, and the other 2 we could make it socially relevant if it's necessary, but it doesn't have to be. So we sat through months of planning and talking about defining what socially relevant means and wrote it into our constitution, and that meant that moving forward we would have 4 shows that are all socially relevant and things like that. Things that also have changed, I talk about the ways that the board has become more representative of what our student body has been like. I remember my freshman year, it was all white board, and 2 years after that, we became a majority POC or BIPOC board and majority first generation low income student board. And this changes the way of how we can approach issues and what stories we feel the most comfortable to tell. That's not to say that other people could not have told these stories beforehand, but we definitely came in with a lens of understanding and wanting to put forth these stories because we felt so tied to them. And then finally, I'll talk about financial access and coming as a first generation low income student. Students from Figley backgrounds aren't new to Penn. They've existed and were in all of our clubs for the history of Penn. Maybe much fewer than there are today, but given the growth and the amount of Figley students coming into our clubs, it's not just about, okay, you got in and we give you financial aid, but how are you being able to afford the dues that come with clubs, the ticket fees that go with going to see shows. So that was a big motivation of me to lower ticket prices within theater arts itself. But then when I was a part of the Performing Arts Council talking about things like the PAC Pass, which will hopefully happen, but lowering ticket prices across the board for performing arts groups and making sure that the way that you talk about dues, instead of a come to me and tell me you can't afford our dues and then I'll let you go, approaching it as if you can't afford them, it is what it is, and like we won't talk about it and you don't have to pay them, and shifting that kind of message. And I'll end there because that was a lot.
Thank you. We'll open it for our other students to share.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm in the Penn band and I was in marching band in high school. So like, I definitely knew it was something I wanted to continue when I got to college. And my first interaction with the Penn band was really at Quaker days when I was, touring Penn and seeing like, my first like encounter as an accepted student. And they were just so welcoming from day one. Like it really felt like a community that I could be a part of, and it's kind of been that way ever since. Because it's always just this place where I have this community I can rely on, and always every rehearsal is just a chance to kind of get away from my schoolwork and have fun and play my instrument and hang out with friends. So that's kind of what drew me in. And I think also for some of like the changes that I've seen since getting here, I'm a sophomore, so I don't have so much of a long view perspective yet, but I think since joining, I was recruitment and retention chair last year, so that kind of added to my perspective in terms of the diversity of the students who are joining the band. I think the Penn band, we like to pride ourselves in being all things red and blue, but the leadership has especially been noticing that perhaps we're not actually reflecting the diversity of the Penn community as a whole. And I think it's been an effort over the last few years to kind of draw more focus to that. And with everything that went on last year, it's really been an opportunity for us to more deeply reflect on what it is about our organization that maybe is not attracting as diverse of a student population. So this past year, I joined the board this past semester, and we worked to establish a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. And that's open to all students who want to join it in the band. And we also added a diversity, equity, and inclusion chair on our council who heads the committee. And it's really been a great opportunity so far just to start these conversations and really listen to what people in the band have to say about their experiences of being included. And I think I've noticed like across the performing arts groups here that it's really these conversations have been getting moving really in the last year or so. And Platt has been immensely helpful. They hosted anti-racism workshops for us student leaders to go to, and I think it was open to anybody in the performing arts, but it was also just a chance for us, all of the leaders of different groups, to kind of talk about these issues together and work through them together. I know I was there with Jake, and it was a really great experience. So really getting these conversations started, and I think another thing that the band has been working on for a few years, but is really going to crack down this summer and really talk about and work through more is our repertoire, because music we play is really important to our membership and, you know, enjoying the music we're playing and feeling like you can relate to the music we're playing. And also when we're trying to attract students to join the group and just playing for an audience, you know, we want to have a repertoire that reflects who's actually listening to us. And so I think starting to think more about that as well has been a change.
Thank you. Jake?
Yeah, let's see, what can I add? So I as Mamta said in her intro, I've been involved with the Glee Club and keynotes a cappella throughout my 4 years. Honestly, I kind of had a different experience than Lewis or Laila did. I really only started taking music seriously as a junior in high school when I had to stop playing sports for medical reasons. It was always something I enjoyed, but it was not sort of a main priority or something I envisioned myself doing down the line. So when I got to Penn, my goal was to join an a cappella group because I was, obsessed with pentatonics like every other high schooler that sang. And I was like, sure, I'll do that. That's great. And then I just auditioned for as many groups as I could and realized, I didn't understand how the Performing Arts Council was structured and all this stuff. So I ended up in the Glee Club and I ended up in keynotes, and I was like, oh, wait, I can do both of these things. And some people were like, well, you can if you're insane and you try to make it work. But I was like, you know what? I can be insane. That's fine. I'll try to make it work because it was fun. So that's sort of why I stayed. It was pretty obvious from the get-go that these communities were unlike any other on campus in terms of what you can do when you rehearse and then get on stage together, and in terms of just the people you get to build those friendships with. So once I was in, it would have been borderline criminal to walk away. I think it was just too good to pass up. So that's how I sort of unwittingly got this involved in the performing arts. And as I'm approaching graduation here, I am really glad that I did so. In terms of changes that I've seen, the elephant in the room is the recent merger between the Glee Club and Sirens, which opens up the Glee Club's choir to singers of all genders and all voice parts. That process has been years in the making and really sort of intensified this year after several years of internal discussion and some more preliminary discussion, both with Platt and Penn and with our alumni and other stakeholders and Sirens. So there were a lot of moving pieces in that, and to see it come to fruition this year is obviously a big and exciting change. Similar to some of the things Laila was talking about, the band, we also added a diversity and inclusion chair position this year. And we revived our community service chair position. I believe that was last year. So I think if I had to sum it up, I would say that a lot of these changes have been talked about for a long time. They take an immense amount of consideration and a lot of discussion and debate. But I think that more and more you see people not only wanting to say the right things and think the right things, but do the right things. And the further along in my time we've gotten, I just see more and more motivation to do those things and to make them happen, and to, you know, grit your teeth and do the work that needs to be done to create a better group for whatever group you're in, and a better performing arts landscape for Penn students as a whole. So it's hard to sum up everything that everyone does. Even as a graduating senior, there's probably a lot that's happened on this campus that I don't even know about. But if I had to sort of isolate a theme from what I personally have seen, that would be it.
Thank you. So thank you, Louis, Laila, and Jake, for your wisdom and lived narrative perspective. I want to just offer a moment for Daina and Dr. Beavers. I would love for you to reflect. What are your general reflections or reactions to kind of hearing wisdom from our students?
I was deferring to you, Dr. Beavers, of course.
And if I could unmute my microphone, I'd be talking. I have Zoom fatigue. Well, I'm always amazed at the organizational skills that it requires to put together and run a student arts group. I was editor of my student literary magazine in college, and just figuring out the budget to do that was just mind-boggling. So I'm always amazed at the fact that when you think about the Glee Club or the band, you know, in some instances they have to get themselves from the Penn campus to someplace else, and they have to make those arrangements themselves. So I'm always amazed at the and impressed with and a little bit intimidated by these young people's ability to make the proverbial trains run on time with regard to their arts organizations. And then there's just I really wish I could be a fly on the wall to hear the discussions about the actual making of the art, you know, the making of music or producing a play or putting together a concert. Because, you know, a lot of these students are not going to go on to be professional artists, but in a sense, they already are professional artists because they're doing the things that professional artists do.
I have to enter the conversation as an advisor working in university life, and I have a private equation for what I think is a reasonable class load, and all of you are in violation, complete and total violation. I don't know if I mentioned it previously. I will say, as a person who was greatly enriched by my experience in the arts, that I know that it gives more than it takes. And I know that you give such a great energy to it, and it gives it back to you to help you with your studies. My undergrad experience was a great marriage of my extracurriculars and my academic studies. And I'm happy to report that. I feel like I was given direction. I almost created my own internship. I was ready to go into the world because what I had done in theater, and I knew how to do lighting. Who knows how to do lighting? There are so many things I can do in the world because I know how to do lighting. So it gives you more, you know, it definitely gives you more. Coming back to Penn after leaving and seeing the way students really embrace the arts as sort of like a 6th or 7th class, an 8th for some of you, again, total violations, is encouraging because you see the love of it. And the other thing I've witnessed is an entering into the space for the sake of the art and not coming with your identity, but allowing your identity to enhance the art. And I think, Laila, you mentioned something about building the repertoire. I think over the past 5 years, I have seen such a development and such a consideration of the art that we're sharing and that we're honoring. And I appreciate that coming directly from you as the students. And so that's something I've watched you all do. It's encouraging and it's exciting, especially since we move online. For groups like, Glee Club and Penn Band, getting that written music and keeping it and retaining it, there's a lot of history there. And just hearing that there was a show done virtually, what? Just the emerging technologies that you all are embracing and using. I definitely applaud it. And like Dr. Beavers, slightly intimidated, slightly.
Thank you all. You all are just what a collective gift of a panel. Okay, so now I'm going to move into some more specific questions and reflection. So one of the questions that I have for us is, so in 2017, Yale a cappella group, the Dukes, ceased being all male. In their case, they didn't consult with the alumni first. The Penn Glee Club did, and the response was inconclusive. However, in both cases, among current student members, the vote to change from being an all-male club was unanimous. I'd love to hear your reflections on why should that unanimity among students be significant to alumni, and why are undergraduate students coming together to advocate for these changes now? So what is happening in this moment, and what should we learn from what you all are doing?
I guess I can start with this one. I think that to, address the first part of the question first about the importance of unanimity. I think from my perspective, the reason it's important is because it didn't happen overnight. When I was a freshman entering the group, this was something that was being talked about, but it was very much not a popular opinion or sort of a mainstream idea, if you will. It was something that a few people were advocating for, and we were discussing it, but it wasn't going anywhere. It didn't have a lot of momentum. But people who really cared about it continued to sort of keep that conversation alive. And it wasn't pushing their ideas on people. It wasn't, haranguing people to change their opinion and agree with them. It was just keeping the discussion open, keeping the discussion alive, and continuing to make sure that our board and really our entire membership was always being intentional about how to create the best group possible. And over my 4 years, you just sort of experience this shift, and it happened quickly, but it happened gradually, and it happened in a notable fashion, to where instead of a few people saying, this is really important to me, I think we should do this, it was the whole group together saying, this is really important to us. Now, board members, like, we're electing you to your positions, go get this done, right? Like, don't steamroll anybody, and don't do it in a way that's going to be irresponsible or cut corners, but let's start doing the work to explore how this might be feasible, or I guess in the first place, if it's going to be feasible. So to me, the unanimity is important because it develops over time, and when you see more and more classes of members come into the club and have their experience, and they say, well, this is a great experience, I love the Glee Club, I care a lot about it, but here's this thing that we could do to improve the experience for members present and future, then I think that speaks volumes. If you've got a 50-50 split, then that's certainly something to grapple with. You can't ignore half the group advocating for a change from the status quo. But like the question said, I mean, the Glee Club's vote was unanimous. And when you have unanimous agreement on something, that's strong momentum in that direction, right? And I think it's important for everybody to sort of just see how you get to that point, and the fact that it wasn't always like that. But once you do get to that point, you can't ignore the entirety of a group feeling that way. So I think it's just important to see that maybe something starts as a grassroots thing, if you will. But when it gains traction and more groups are being intentional about thinking about how to do these things, it will continue to gain traction, I think. It's impossible to overlook it.
I really I appreciate your reflection on kind of the steadiness and kind of staying with something over time. And maybe the time isn't ready for the advocacy at hand. And at some point there's a convergence as people begin to stay in it, as we stay in it with one another. Just continuing on this conversation and set of reflections, I just want to expand the question a bit and would love to hear collective reflection. So as this example shows, the arts have always kind of been, the arts have provided a platform to speak out and promote change. And I know that, as you all likely know and remember, the summer of 2020 sparked a lot of activity around the fight in advancement of social justice and the fight against injustice in many forms. And so we've had many pivotal moments in 2020. The summer of 2020 is really hard for us to ignore. It's important for us to be, present in that. And we can think about moments in Penn's history, right? We could think of a time in the 80s and 90s when actual gender binary based organizations were the progressive thing at the time, right? And how over time, inclusion continues to change, or diversity and inclusion in the 90s and 2000s has become a priority. The Platt Performing Arts House, becomes established in 2007. So you see kind of with progression of time, moments where we use that social platform that the arts provides. The question, I guess, with that reflection is, how have you seen cultural moments and movements influence performing arts groups at Penn? So continuing, expanding kind of on Jake's reflections related to the Glee Club, I would love to hear from others, like, how have you seen those moments transform our performing arts?
Yeah, I think kind of to continue on what I was saying before and kind of what Jake was bringing up is like, there have been conversations about race and diversity in the performing arts happening, but last summer really brought those conversations to the forefront, and it really helped to accelerate them and really kind of open the doors. So those conversations weren't necessarily happening just between board members, it was more happening among the organization as a whole. And so I think, that's kind of where, like, I've seen performing arts groups start to talk about these issues a lot more, and I think talking and listening has really been the starting point, and listening to each other and listening to the people in our organizations about how we can make changes and what are the changes that people want to see. So I think that the events of last summer have really accelerated these conversations, even though they've been happening over time. And while the changes we're making, we're really not looking to do anything super drastic right now, but it can have a drastic effect on how people feel in the organization and how they feel included. So I think it's really important that we're talking about these things now, and it's really good that it's come up to the front and helped to spark starting our DEI committee and taking some action.
Thank you, Laila. Would anyone else like to reflect? Yes, Louis.
Yeah, I think that continuation that Laila was talking about is something that I find really important. It's not just the changes that you make for your group, but the people who are outside of your group, the new incoming students, the future students who aren't even here yet, who see what a group represents, or what a group, who belongs in quotes in a group. And and if they feel comfortable joining that group, or if they feel like this is a group that they don't belong and want to change that because of whatever factor it may be. But to talk about specifically this past summer, before the summer, Front Row and 4A were in conversations about starting and doing a collaboration show for our spring musical. This was something that was because through both leadership on both boards, but after things progressed in our conversations, we also realized that this was not just a moment where the two of us could come together or the two groups could come together, but a thing that all groups in TACI were trying to promote within their own works, of whether that be racial justice or working in terms of supporting a show that is focused and centered around the Black experience in the show Pipeline, if anybody's seen it. And that went from a 2-group collab to then becoming a 5-group collab led by Adam first, who was our TACI chair this past year, and then all the different chairs within our groups. And looking at how it's not just about one group or 2 groups putting together and centering experiences, but how do we collectively come together and put all of our resources behind one show and make that the one show that is happening during the semester, so that everybody comes to see this show instead of shows every single weekend. But that was because of conversations in the past, and then whatever we were thinking about in the spring semester, and then all of the events that happened in summer 2020, and then all the conversations with the 5 groups in fall 2020. So the progression of timeline.
Any other reflections?
Well, one thing that's clear is that, and I say this as somebody that was in college during the tail end of the Black arts movement, the arts are, first off, they're organic in ways that groups that organize around political activities tend not to be, because people sort of get into their various camps. Whereas art, art is about the both and. It's not about the either or. And you really can't be an artist if you can't embrace that. And I think the other thing is that, in terms of a summer like last summer, with the protests going on and Black Lives Matter and people being out in the streets, the arts are nimble in ways that some more formal organizations are not. So right after the 2017 election, some students and I organized a reading at the Kelly Writers House to respond to the election, and it came together in probably about 5 days. We didn't have a huge turnout for it, but people came. They read poems, they listened to one another. They understood that poetry in this instance was being used as political commentary, and it was something that we didn't need to plan 6 months in advance. It was something that came together about a week before we did it, and the arts makes that possible. And by virtue of that, it gives students skills that they don't even know that they have, because when your only thought is, how are we going to get this up on stage, right? How are we going to make this work? You sort of have to put aside your doubts about the content that you're going to present, and what sort of drives it is your commitment to the content, and that's a wonderful thing.
I also believe that the events of last summer probably broadened the content that's being considered and allowed us to consider and look at sort of nostalgia. I think for a lot of people, last summer was an awakening, and it was an expansion of thought, and I expect that to flow into the arts as well. Most of what I work with at MAKUU and just as a person is narrative. A lot of what I do is grounded in narrative. My career in music, grounded in narrative. And looking at what the students are trying to share, some of it will be done through the art, and some of it will be done via their identity in the art. And that may surprise people, where certain identities show up, and in what forms and in what places. I think as Laila mentioned, we're also looking to see if we're being inclusive in our repertoire and in the things that we are bringing to the stage. And also, are we being closed-minded about our assumptions of who enjoys nostalgia and who enjoys the classics? Can we expand our thoughts around that? So I think the conversations will continue to happen. It will be, this last summer was the rock, the pebble, and the pond. I expect to see ripples for many, many years. And I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. So, you know, Daina, you actually lead us into our next question. This idea of nostalgia, right? There's almost this, there's a poetic tension between nostalgia and change, right? And so, and change can feel threatening and scary, especially when we think about, you know, tradition being involved. You know, in my alma mater, you know, there's a lot of activism around the school song, right? And you know, there's nostalgia and tradition around the school song, and a lot of activism in thinking about that particular issue with the Eyes of Texas, the University of Texas. And so, again, that tension between nostalgia and change. So, and when change can be really scary, especially when tradition is involved and when you're doing something that you love. So I would love to hear advice from some of you, your own reflections. How would you mentor or guide someone like me as an alum of an institution? How would you guide us to think about that? Like, how would you guide us? You know, what questions would you ask alumni to reflect on or think about as they respond to these moments of change? Or maybe if you could offer some guidance on healthy and supportive ways in which we can support, you know, as alumni, that we can support the current student experience and still remain involved while holding on to the nostalgia and embracing change. Any guidance for us?
My first point of guidance, just as someone who's in university life, is to go to a show. Art does not change over time. It has to be engaged. It has to be experienced. And I have learned more by attending the show than reflecting upon articles or anything like that. Being in the presence of students presenting their art is very educational.
Yeah, I would second that. I try to make it a point, particularly with the African American Arts Alliance, but then other groups. You know, I've taken a Saturday afternoon and gone to a matinee and sat in the back. You know, or I've gone to the Exilano Project show on a Saturday evening. And you know, again, I'm just struck by the fact that it's very difficult in any sort of arts organization that has existed over a long period of time for one group to have a proprietary relationship to it. You know, once you graduate, you're sort of relinquishing control of the everyday aspects of the organization. Maybe there are people that get involved from a distance, or they serve on a board, but in the end, you're reliant on the imaginations of the people that are there at the time. And you sort of have to take the leap of faith with them that when they, so, you know, getting back to Laila's commentary about repertoire, you know, there may be some alums of the Penn band that say, you know, why aren't we playing such and such song anymore? But the thing is, you know, we live in a moment where if you look at popular music, it crosses so many lines at this point that I think perhaps without even knowing it, the musicians right now in the Penn band are probably multilingual in ways that they don't even recognize, and taking on, you know, new songs for the repertoire actually enhances that and makes it a much better and richer and more engaging performance for more people. And that's an exciting prospect.
Bullshit. I think it's a really interesting question for me to reflect on now, because I'm 6 days away from being an alum. So it's kind of funny to like envision myself, well, hey, what should I do next week? But I think that in all seriousness, I think that the Glee Club's year of the Initiative for a Gender Inclusive Choir has made me think about this a lot, because one of our 3 pillars is tradition. And that, I think there's a certain level of gravitas that holds, and a certain amount of pressure that sort of puts on members of the club to be stewards of this nearly 160-year-old organization. And when you proclaim that one of your pillars is tradition, then there's something to uphold there, right? But I think that it all depends on your understanding of tradition and how it works, because traditions evolve, the university evolves, the world around us evolves. The traditions are different now than they were 2 years ago, or 10 years ago, or in 1862 when the club was founded. And so I think that is one of the things that's really difficult, is when you know that, hey, this group really values tradition, but you see things changing. How do you square that in your head? And so I guess the way I would see it, I think one of the best things that alums can do is, along the lines of going to shows and sort of being present, is getting to know current members. Of course, that can be difficult. You know, everybody's busy, and it's not like people have all this spare time to just chat. But I think it's important, because I think the big changes are the ones that get people's attention. And when you make a big change, people think you're breaking tradition. But so many little things change in unspoken ways or unofficial ways. They just happen. No one even says they want it to happen. It just changes. Like the vibe of the club is a lot different than it was when I joined. I don't know how that happened. Nobody made it so. It just happens because new people come along and other people graduate. So I think just continuing to stay connected, providing historical perspective, because historical perspective can be really valuable in informing future decisions and contextualizing discussions that are happening in the present. But continuing to ask questions, continuing to be open to the fact that, like for me, for example, my experience will never change. Like my 4 years will be the 4 years that they were. And the best thing I can do as an alum is put the future members of the group in position to have the best experience they can.
Right. And y'all feel free to chime in, and we can be fluid if you have more reflections on this important question. As you think about, as you all continue to think about change and transformation and evolution, how, in what ways should we be thinking about, and should student organizations think about how those changes, the changes that you make, or the ways that you consider the continued evolution of your communities, that how can you ensure a sustainability to those changes? And what role does kind of revisiting or talking about your values, Jake, like in the case that you talked about tradition being as one of your pillars, how do your values guide you through that to maintaining sustainability as you implement social change?
I think in the Penn band, we just kind of this past year has marked 50 years of women on Franklin Field. And so several students were part of a project in which we got to engage with a lot of alumni and have discussions and hear about their experiences. So I think that was a really positive experience. And it made us realize that while there have been many changes in the group, there are also things that have really stayed the same. Like something that we learned from alumni is the reasons people join the group has basically stayed the same. Like people are really passionate about music and playing their instrument, so they join the Penn band, and people end up staying because of, you know, the friendship and camaraderie. Like that has not changed at all. And it's more these discussions that we're having, they're all about how do we make sure that more people can relate to that and more people are feeling that in the Penn community as the Penn community has changed over time. So whether that has to do with changing the repertoire so more people feel like they're passionate about the things we're playing and they want to join us, and how are we making it so that people are making friends in our organization? How are we being inclusive in that way? So I think, you know, it's not so much that our values are changing, they are staying the same. It's more about how are we making sure that everybody is still, you know, as demographics change, how are we making sure that everybody's still relating to those things, and how that may be looking a little different than it used to. And so I think that, you know, as Jake and Dr. Beavers and Daina were commenting on, like having alumni engage with our organization still is, you know, some of the best way to stay in touch with what those values still look like today. And I'm really thankful for our very active alumni and how much support they give us, and how they really do continue to like see how those values play out in our organization.
Laila, I really value, you know, as I was hearing you speak, you know, this idea of, you know, Dr. Beavers, when you opened, you began with, you know, the performing arts being nimble, right? Nimble to being able to adjust kind of to the, and be responsive to the social issues of the time. And Laila, I feel like you closed the loop in that, when you talk about sustainability, it really is that the performing arts allow us to be culturally responsive. And so the sustainability is that we're being responsive in that space, right? And so just really want to thank you. And I want to thank the entire, you know, folks have their own rich questions for you. And so we want to move now to the Q&A portion of our time together. So this is an opportunity for our participants and attendees in the audience. Do y'all have questions for our esteemed panelists? Please feel free to put them in the chat.
It looks like someone might have raised their hand.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't know if you just wanted stuff in the chat or if you were cool with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So hi, I'm Rachel Kugelmass, and I was actually very involved in the theater community as the founder of Stimulus Children's Theater. And the question that I have, particularly for the students, you know, Jake, something that you said really resonated with me, and that was, sorry, got a camera better, you know, that it took time to achieve that unanimity that you needed to move forward. And, you know, as somebody who has now gone out into the world and spent many years working in community theater, you know, we have some of these same discussions. I think the advantage perhaps that you've had in the Penn community is that your demographics are within a narrower band, and perhaps with a population that's more open to that change and that timeline for change. And so I'm curious to hear thoughts from all of you who are living through that, having tried to deal with those issues of diversity and inclusion. But you know, if you go out, for example, and you're going into the broader population, working with, let's say, a community theater where you've got, you know, wide spectrum of ages, but perhaps more heavily concentrated with older folks, how you would try to apply those lessons that you've learned. Because we do have, you know, in my theater group, a lot of conversations about this, but it's a much more tortured journey. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were coming and joining my theater group today, knowing that it's going to take a little longer, how would you travel that path? I didn't mean to put you on the spot personally, Jake. Anybody can answer.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it at least. It's a good question. I think that one of the first things that I would probably try to do is figure out why. Like why might there be more resistance to change, or what is causing people to look at a longer time horizon or a slower pace. I do think that you're right in saying that, there is motivation to do things quickly and to make these things expeditious. But I also think that one thing we talked about a lot was we only get one chance to do this. And if we mess it up, then we can't undo it. So we wanted to do it as efficiently as we could, but we didn't want to cut corners. We didn't want to go, at breakneck speed to the point that we didn't do our homework and we didn't, give all of the different stakeholders a chance to have a voice in the process. And we didn't, really be intentional about every aspect of it, because at that point you're setting yourself up for, a nice PR story and then to fall flat on your face. And that was just not an option from our perspective. So I think that would sort of be my approach, is to say, why do we envision the timeline this way? Why do we think that this is the process we need? Because there's probably a reason behind that, and maybe it's legitimate. And if you just get people to sort of put it out in the open and say, like, these are the reasons we think this is going to take this long, maybe that's fine. And then all of a sudden everybody's agreed, hey, this maybe this will go a little slower than a college theater group would, but now we're all on the same page, and we can all move toward that agreed upon goal, I guess. So I think sort of aligning thoughts on that would be a key goal for me. It's easier said than done, of course, but that's just the first thing that comes to mind.
As y'all continue to respond and reflect, I really want to point in the chat, it's worth reading out loud. So Nicole Malloy offers the reflection: as a Penn alum, I was very proud to read this quote from Jake in the Penn Today piece. And the quote is, "We talked a lot about the fact that we bill ourselves as the unofficial music ambassadors of the university, and it's tough to be an ambassador for the university if a significant portion of the student body is not eligible to be in the chorus." So just want to uplift that and offer gratitude to all of you. And then there is another question in the chat as well. To my fellow students, how do we change the culture of student organizations to be more inclusive? How do we encourage students who graduate after us to continue the mission toward more inclusion?
Take a stab at the first part, and thinking about the ways that we exist as singular groups, but we also exist in a community of the Performing Arts Council, in a community of the Student Activities Council, where we get our funding from, and thinking about how if we are trying to create a more inclusive environment within our groups, are there also barriers existent outside that might make it more difficult? And do you need to start with Performing Arts Council? Do you need to start with the Student Activities Council? And getting to understand how they are funding your groups, or in order to stay recognized and get support from Platt, what are commitments of the number of people in your group that you must meet? And getting that better understanding, you could bring it back to your boards and talk about, yes, we have to meet these ABC requirements, but also what are the ways that we can meet those requirements while being more inclusive of the people who we are trying to have join our groups. I think that I'll talk about the specific example with the students SAC. The way that we fund groups, you have to go through a budget and allocation period where things like money cannot go towards merchandise. So merchandise being t-shirts from a show, or bags or hats or whatever it comes from a show, and we cannot fund those things. that also means that people who come from lower income backgrounds aren't going to be able to afford it if you can't put the money that you get from student activities into funding all of these different social events or all of these different merchandise. And these are barriers that exist. And if you could work as an organization or consolidate various PAC groups to lobby SAC as a whole to open up their restrictive, I try to be liberal with the words that I say, but more restrictive guidelines, and you're able to coalesce a group of people to knock those barriers down, it could also have a downstream effect that doesn't just support your group, but also supports all 250 groups that are on campus to create a more inclusive environment.
And I think to kind of hop on about, how do we continue the mission towards inclusion even after we graduate, I think it has a lot to do with how many people are kind of helping us to make those changes now and how many people we're including in the conversation. Because if we can get, we have our DEI committee that we established, it's open to anyone in the band who can join it. And we have a good range of people from different class years involved in it. So if we can keep that involvement up so that people from all years are joining, I think that helps to keep the momentum rather than just a few select people in one year, one section talking about these things. If we're including as many people as possible in the conversation and keeping people engaged that way, it will continue to get passed down.
Thank you. I want to, we have another question in the chat. This is from Nick. Hi, I graduated in the class of 2019 and was a member of Mask and Wig as well as a techie with several other groups, including STEM. I think how lucky I am for just missing the pandemic. And the question leads into how significant was the impact of the pause on in-person interaction on change being made, and how might the momentum that has created run with or against the work of relearning what it's like to be a show together in person fully?
Yeah, this was obviously a defining aspect of the last 3 semesters, and of course everybody's life throughout the past however many months. I think in a way the pandemic will actually be more influential in terms of change after, starting next year, if that can really be construed as after versus during. I think so much of this year was spent getting our footing and just doing the best we could, whether that was academically or in the arts or personally. Certainly without in-person interactions, we had more time because we couldn't spend so many hours doing other things. But it was also difficult to schedule meetings and to get good attendance. I mean, after a while, you can only ask people to sit on so many Zoom calls before they just say, no thanks. So I think in a lot of ways, yes, this expedited change, but it also slowed change down in some senses. And I think the reason that it will be such a force in the future is there's no longer any pretense of this is the way we've always done it. Personally, I think it's one of my least favorite answers to any question. I hate that. Like, I just think it's a boring, bland, lazy answer to say this is how we've always done it. Maybe if you think about it, the way you've always done it actually is the best way. And then you can say, this is the best way to do it. But if you actually sit down and think about it and you realize that it's not the best way anymore, you can see how to change things. And I think now we couldn't do a single thing the way it's always been done. So, the 3 classes below me, like Laila's class, for example, and, future Penn students, I don't think, until a generation has gone by and we're, telling our kids about COVID, hopefully, then it's just impossible to believe that anybody will be content with this is how we've always done it. That's at least how I feel about, the next few years.
That sentence was exactly what I was going to say. Our PAC exec got t-shirts saying because that's how it's always been done, because that was always the excuse that we would hear when we tried to implement something and groups came back to us of like, but that's not how we did it before. And I think what happens with the pandemic is exactly what Jake said, is that yes, we faced limitations. We couldn't put on shows together. Our hours for rehearsal had to change because people were on the other side of the world. But that also limitations is also opening up the possibility of what you can do once you're back on campus. So it's not looking about it as limitations, but alternate possibilities that you can then infuse into your work once you're back on campus. So maybe we don't have to have such a rigid 4 nights a week from 6:30 to 10:30 is our rehearsal schedule, because that's 20 hours a week and people don't need to be in rehearsal for that long. And we were able to put on shows without needing to do that during the pandemic. So why can't we do that now? Or why can't we be as accommodating as we were to attendance? Why do people need to come to every single thing? And yes, we want to build that camaraderie of coming back together, but there are also, don't lose sense of the appreciation towards in person, but also don't let people say, I can't come to this and then be mad at them for not coming, because we shouldn't hold ourselves to the same standards as we did in the past, and understanding that appropriate possibility is something that we should be implementing and guiding us in the next year and over in the future.
I want to, Dr. Beavers, I want to just reflect on, and then I'll hand it to you, and then we'll close out the panel. I just want to carry this idea that alternate possibility, like we can just remove the term alternate. That's so great. Like now it's just, we're free to embrace the possibilities without something being an alternate or secondary or less than. And I just really appreciate your collective invitation to us for that. Dr. Beavers.
Yeah, I just want to say that, you know, when we look back on the pandemic, we will look back on the ways that people adapted to the technology. You know, I teach this class where my students write a theater piece at the end of the semester. And, you know, the whole idea of the fourth wall sort of falls away, because you have to figure out a way to imagine this character as they are framed in this sort of 3x5, 1x3 box, or play your instrument while you're doing that. One of the things that we may have seen, and we just don't have a chance yet to really understand the full impact of it, is the manner in which the imagination did not falter in a situation where people could not be in the same room together. I mean, if you think about, you know, music groups and how their synergy comes from being in close physical proximity to one another, that they were able to do that over Zoom, it means that we literally have, I maybe call it an evolution of the species is probably going a little bit too far, but in terms of the evolution of human attention and human imagination, that I think is really significant, and that is not to be gainsaid.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beavers. With that, I really want to take a moment to thank our panelists, and thank you all for being so present in our conversation. And with that, I want to hand it back off to Gil.
Yes, thank you. Oh my gosh, what a conversation that was, y'all. So I just want to thank, you know, our panelists, our moderators, also Nicole Malloy for all of her work with helping to plan this, alongside my fellow alums on the Platt House Advisory Committee. And of course, you know, the Platt staff that really helped coordinate this really wonderful conversation. That just continues to remind me that like Penn really is a microcosm for so many bigger societal issues that we see in our world. So I will be taking all of these really, you know, inspiring thoughts that were shared and just seeing how it manifests in our world and in our lived experiences. And thank you for all that were on this call in the audience. You know, we had a really consistent number throughout this evening, so that really is a testament to your attention and your focus, and also the seriousness of this issue. And with that, is there anything else that I am missing, Lori?
No, we're just very grateful to everyone. We appreciate the conversation so much. And of course, if you have questions afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Yes, and Herman, yes, thanks. He just wrote in the chat, congratulations to the seniors and thanks to the audience for coming. Yes, we have some seniors graduating, so we'll miss you.